Hi everybody! Welcome back to Bible Time with Miss Kristina. I am here to read you another Bible story. Today I'm going to be reading out of the Jesus Storybook Bible by Sally Lloyd-Jones. This is our copy. It's pretty torn up because we've read it through quite a few times. We really like this book. So I'm going to be reading you a Bible story from the Bible. And I chose Daniel and the Scary Sleepover. It's from Daniel chapter 6, and I'm sure you've probably heard of the story of Daniel in the lion's den. So that's the story we're going to read today, and then we'll talk about it, okay? Things were not looking good for God's people. They had been captured and taken far from home, and now they were slaves of the king of Babylon. But God had not left his people. He was with them, and he was looking after them. Daniel loved God and obeyed him. Now God made Daniel able to understand lots of difficult things. So it wasn't long before the king of Babylon noticed him. King Darius liked how clever Daniel was, so he made Daniel his most important helper of all, and put him in charge of lots of other helpers. But the other helpers didn't like this. They wanted the king to like them best. They wanted to get rid of Daniel. So they spied on Daniel, and they tried to find things wrong with Daniel. Things that they could tell the king. Things they could, but there weren't any. None. They couldn't find anything at all. Except there was just the one thing. Every day, 3 times a day, without fail, no matter what, Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. They smiled to themselves. Let's get the king to make a law. No one is allowed to pray to anyone except the king. Daniel won't obey this law, and he will be punished. They were pleased with themselves for being so clever, and they hurried off to tell the king. The king liked their idea. He didn't know that they were tricking him, so he made it into law. Everyone must pray only to me. If you don't, the lions will have you for their dinner. Daniel heard this. He knew it was wrong to pray to anyone except God. He had to do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant that he would die. So Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. That's just what the bad men knew Daniel would do. They skipped straight off to tell the king, "Oh, your most glittering highness, your law says, does it not, that everyone must pray to you alone, sir?" "Yes," said the king. "Oh, magisterial brightness, then correct us if we're wrong, but it would seem that Daniel is praying to God and not to you." The king was sad. He had been tricked. He didn't want to hurt Daniel, but he couldn't change his law. And so he let the soldiers throw Daniel to the lions. "May your God, who you love so much, rescue you," the king said. The king went back to his palace, but he didn't sleep that night, not a wink. He tossed and turned until finally, at the first glimmer of dawn, he leaped out of bed and ran straight to the den. "Daniel," he cried, "has your God rescued you?" "Yes," Daniel shouted. "God sent an angel to close the lions' mouths." And there, resting his head on Daniel's lap, was the biggest lion, purring like a little kitten. The king brought Daniel out of the den. "Look," he said, "Daniel doesn't even have a scratch." The king made a new law. Daniel's God is the true God, the God who rescues. Pray to him instead. God would keep on rescuing his people, And the time was coming when God would send another brave hero like Daniel, who would love God and do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. And together, they pull off the greatest rescue the world has ever known. You know, the story of Daniel is very interesting. Daniel was living in a country where the leaders didn't love God. The king didn't know God, and the king's people didn't know God. And they had all kinds of different cultural things that they did, and everything that they did was different than what Daniel was used to, because Daniel was an Israelite, and so he had certain things that he did to be obedient to God. And so Daniel, let me get back his picture. One of the things that Daniel did every day was he would pray to God every day, and that was what God had called him to do. You know, some Christians in other parts of the world, they live in places where nobody loves God, and where the leaders don't love God, and where all of their cultural things and the stuff that they do in their country is different than what Christians do. And so sometimes Christians, just like Daniel, have to make a choice whether they're going to obey God and his word, or whether they're going to obey the leaders in their country. Now, we have been really blessed in America because we have lived for a very long time in a country that gives us something called religious freedom, where we get to choose who we worship and how we worship. And as Christians, that's a huge blessing because we haven't been persecuted here in America. We get to worship God and love God and pray to God as many times a day as we want to. But things aren't always going to stay that way. Sometimes people want to change what's going on in the country. And so there might be a day when in America, we might have to make a choice just like Daniel did. And the Bible tells us that God is with us. You know, in Joshua 1:9 it says, be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so there might be a time coming someday, maybe not today or tomorrow, maybe not next year, but in a couple of years, where Christians will have to choose whether they're going to obey the world, or they're going to obey the word of God. And so I hope that you've been encouraged by Daniel and his how brave he was and how committed he was to serving God, even when he knew that something really bad could happen to him. And I also want to make one more point about this. Do you remember where Daniel was thrown? He was thrown into the lion's den. And sometimes when people teach this story, they want you to think that if you just listen to God and you follow God, that God will always keep you from the lions. And that's a nice thought. But even if God had let the lions eat Daniel, God would have still been a good God. He still would have been worth praying to. He still would have been sovereign over everything, and it still would have been his plan and his purpose. And so if there comes a time where you have to make a choice of whether you're going to follow Jesus or you're going to follow the world, choose Jesus every time. And don't worry about the outcome, because you know that God is in control and he's sovereign over it all. And he wants you to be obedient and to love him and to serve him no matter what. So I hope you enjoyed that story. I'll be back again next week to read you another Bible story. I might read out of this one because I ran out of my little picture books, or I might order some more. We'll see. I'll ask Pastor Gavin. So enjoy your week, and I'll see you again next Sunday. Bye.